In the urgent fight against climate change, policymakers face a critical decision: cap and trade or carbon tax. These are the two main strategies that have emerged in the quest to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Let's take a moment to explore them. The cap and trade strategy sets a limit on emissions and then assigns tradable allowances to entities. It's a market-based solution that encourages innovation as entities compete to reduce their emissions and sell their unused allowances. However, this approach can be complex to manage and may experience price volatility. On the other hand, a carbon tax strategy imposes a tax directly on emissions. This sends a clear price signal that encourages behavioral change. It's simpler to implement, but may face political resistance and does not guarantee a specific level of emissions reductions. In essence, cap and trade encourages innovation, but can be complex, while carbon taxes provide a clear price signal but may face political resistance. Cap and trade systems set a cap on allowable emissions and issue tradable allowances. Here's how it works. Imagine a group of factories, each with its own smokestack pumping out carbon dioxide. The government steps in and sets a cap, a limit on the total amount of carbon that can be emitted. Each factory receives a certain number of allowances, representing the amount of carbon they're permitted to emit. But here's the twist. These allowances can be bought and sold. If a factory can lower its emissions, it can sell its surplus allowances to another factory. This creates a market where the commodity is the right to pollute. The system incentivizes factories to innovate and reduce their emissions because there's a financial reward for doing so. The more efficient they become, the more allowances they can sell. But as with any market, there are challenges. The price of allowances can fluctuate, creating uncertainty. If prices rise too high, it could hurt businesses. If they fall too low, there's less incentive to cut emissions. Administering the system can also be complex. It requires careful monitoring to ensure factories aren't emitting more than their allowances. And it requires enforcement to penalize those who break the rules. This market-based approach provides flexibility and encourages innovation, but it can be prone to price volatility and administrative complexity. Carbon taxes directly tax emissions, providing a clear price signal and encouraging behavioral change. This approach is straightforward. It places a monetary price on the carbon content of fossil fuels, thereby making carbon-intensive activities more expensive. The goal? To incentivize businesses and consumers to reduce their carbon footprint by opting for greener alternatives. Now, the benefits of a carbon tax are manifold. It provides a predictable and stable price for carbon, which can help businesses plan for the future. It's also simpler to administer than cap and trade systems, with less room for market manipulation. One of the most appealing aspects of a carbon tax is the potential for revenue recycling. This means the government can use the funds collected from the tax to invest in renewable energy projects, energy efficiency programs, or even distribute it back to citizens in the form of tax cuts or dividends. But there are potential hurdles. Implementing a carbon tax often faces strong political resistance, particularly from industries that rely heavily on fossil fuels. There's also uncertainty about whether a carbon tax can achieve the necessary emissions reductions, as it depends heavily on how businesses and consumers respond to the price signal. While simpler to implement, carbon taxes may face political resistance and uncertainty in emissions reductions, but with a clear understanding of its benefits and challenges, we can better navigate the path to a sustainable future. California's cap and trade system incentivized emissions reductions and created a market for carbon credits. This approach set a limit on the total amount of greenhouse gases that could be emitted statewide. Companies that reduced their emissions below the cap could sell their excess allowances to companies that exceeded the cap, effectively creating a financial incentive to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This system fostered a market for carbon credits and encouraged innovation in the green economy. However, the cap and trade system is not without its challenges. The price of carbon credits can fluctuate, making it difficult for businesses to predict future costs. Additionally, the system requires a complex administrative structure to monitor and enforce compliance, adding to its operational costs. On the other hand, let's travel north to British Columbia, where a different approach was taken. Here, a carbon tax was implemented, directly taxing greenhouse gas emissions. This provided a clear price signal to businesses and individuals, encouraging them to reduce their carbon footprint. The revenue generated from this tax was then reinvested in clean energy initiatives, helping to accelerate the transition to a green economy. The carbon tax approach is simpler to implement than the cap-and-trade system, as it does not require the establishment of a carbon market or complex monitoring systems. However, it is not without its own set of challenges. The carbon tax faced significant political resistance, as opponents argued it would harm the economy and burden consumers. Furthermore, the impact of the tax on emissions reductions is uncertain, as it depends on the responsiveness of businesses and individuals to price signals. In comparing these two approaches, it's clear that both have their strengths and weaknesses. California's cap-and-trade system and British Columbia's carbon tax both aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but their effectiveness can vary depending on economic, political, and social contexts. Meanwhile, British Columbia's carbon tax provided revenue for climate initiatives but faced political backlash. The optimal strategy depends on economic structure, political feasibility, and equity considerations. When choosing an approach, it's essential to examine the economic makeup of the region. A cap-and-trade system might suit an economy with diverse sectors, while a carbon tax could be more effective in a region with a dominant, carbon-intensive industry. The political climate is another key variable. The acceptability of a carbon tax or a cap-and-trade system can greatly vary depending on the political landscape. Equity considerations also play a pivotal role. It's imperative to ensure the approach adopted does not disproportionately burden lower-income households. Additionally, the possibility of integrating both systems should not be overlooked. A hybrid approach could harness the strengths of both systems, providing flexibility and clear price signals while generating revenue for climate initiatives. A tailored approach, perhaps a combination of both systems, may offer the most effective path forward.